Hey there guys, Noah here, and welcome back to another Vanguard discussion video. Today we're going to do a Zeroth / Progenitor Dragon tier list. Oh, this has been a long time coming for me personally. I've been wanting to come back and make more content for a while now, and I figured I'd start off with a tier list because usually these kind of tend to do pretty good. So, in this video, I'm going to be going over which Zeroth and Progenitor Dragons are currently viable in the premium format. I'll be taking the last couple months of data analysis from VG Paradox into consideration for these tier lists, but regardless, I am kind of curious to see how these actually fare out. So without further ado, let's dive in, and spoiler alert, there will be a channel update at the very end of the video. Alright, so let's start with the Zeroth Dragons first, and I want to talk about Dragma first in particular because I think it hurts more than it helps, right? The biggest issue for Dragma in this case is the fact that Dragma's biggest crime is why use Dragma when literally 95% of the G-Zone does its job better at not only ruining your opponent's board state, but especially in Dragon Empire in particular, because there are a lot of red clans that just naturally retire and just mess up your opponent's board beyond recognition, to a point where just running Dragma is just significantly worse. The top Dragon Empire deck at the format right now, being Shiranui, doesn't even consider this card, because Rene and Sukumura Khan is just 100 times better, and the next best deck, Eradicators, might include it as a side grade, but realistically speaking, it's not necessarily worth it, especially when you have cards like Stumblers and Exterminate. So that's kind of the primary reason why I think Dragma kind of hurts more than it helps the clans that actually want to use it. Up next, we got Megido, and I gotta say, Megido is kind of goated. Despite the fact that Megido, a single defensive trigger could kind of ruin this card sometimes, the biggest advantage for Megido right now is the fact that it's being tagged into Mythic Mega Colony decks. Mostly because they're able to, when they're on Mythiarch Lazuri, they can either go into both Zoah, which I'll get to in a moment, as well as Megido, and in a lot of cases, it's going to be Megido. Combined with a Persona Ride, it's pretty much game over, right? The idea that you have such a strong win condition in this, in a deck that's already control heavy, is insane. And even outside of this, Grand Blue sometimes likes to tech this in. I don't know entirely if the other two clans will tech it in. I want to assume Aqua Force and Bermuda Triangle tech this in just as a nice little finisher in case they can get away with it. And in Bermuda's case in particular, because force markers matter. So it's just a nice recursion. It's nice to be able to pressure, and then it's honestly still being viable to this day, even outside of clans that are actually, you would think, should be allowed to use it, and yet here we are. So definitely Megido is goated. I think it's one of the best kill options right now in the Mythic Mega Colony builds, because literally outside of your two Grey Doras, you really don't have a whole lot. So what do you go into? You go into Megido. So I think that's the kind of reason why it's one of the few cards on this list that's actually going to be goated. Zoah. Okay, Zoah. I'm going to say side grade, and this is my reasoning for it. Despite the fact that Zoah is, let's be honest, power crept to hell, if you know your opponent has a low hand count, they don't have any PGs in hand, and you've put them in a situation where Zoah actually comes up, it is at least a nice side grade. Like in those same Mythiarch builds, they will purposely run the Zoah, so it's actually really solid. I definitely do believe that Zoah is at least a side grade, even in something like, Neonectar. They may want to run it just because they have a way to kind of just say fuck you in a sense, especially if you've already pushed your opponent to such a low hand count and then they overcommit. You can kind of just sit there and go, okay, Zoah, go burr. It's kind of a nice side grade, not necessary for the deck to function, but it is technically there. The results speak for themselves. Up next, we got Stark, and I definitely think it is a very viable card. Stark is one of those few Stargate cards that actually matter in this format, especially for decks that have a low attack pattern, such as Chaos Breaker or even Dimension Police in particular, because a lot of the times, outside of certain strides that allow you to generate additional attacks, Stark is your main win con in certain aspects, right? In Dimension Police, because you're already hitting for really high numbers and crit pressure out the wazoo already, by the time you go into Stark, it's pretty much game over for your opponent unless they somehow manage to hold on to a lot of their PGs preemptively. And even then, it's kind of a really awkward scenario guarding against this, because especially when you combine this with something like V Commander Laurel, or even other cards like Dizoris to give you an additional drive in Dimension Police in particular, Stark just comes up. And even into stuff like Nova Grappler that already naturally has a high attack count, will sometimes tech this in just for that late game cleanup in case they know they've already pushed their opponent to 5 damage, they're running out of cards in their deck, and they want to just make sure they can get enough Vanguard attacks to just clinch the game at that point. So I do definitely see it as viable. All 3 of the Stargate clans can and most likely will use it, and it's actually pretty good in its own right. So I definitely think it is absolutely viable. Then we get to Dust, and I think Dust is still... I actually want to put this above Megido in the goated tier. And the reason for this is very simple, right? What Dust allows you to do is just auto-win certain scenarios, right? This is mostly primarily used in Pale Moon, in particular right now with the Harry package, but even decks like Chronojet can easily go into this stride whenever they feel like it's necessary, and when you combine Dust with the Crest power, and just the amount of rearguard pressure and attacks you could potentially go into with this, it means that in a lot of scenarios, because they've been reduced to 1, meaning they can't G-guard it, meaning they can't necessarily use certain cards to get around it, and in a lot of cases, that's just practically GG at that point, right? Especially in Harry in particular, when you've already got 3 to 4 Excel markers on average, and then you go into this thing with potentially plus 25k to the entire front row, with additional multi-attacking, yeah, that's practically game over without you hitting your over trigger at that point. So I definitely think Dust is goated. I think it's easily one of the best Zeroth dragons in the game, probably the best Zeroth dragon in the game, probably the best card on this tier list, I'm going to be honest with you. So yeah, Dust is amazing. You should be playing Dust 100% if you actually play a Dark State stack. And kind of similarly to how with Megido you're actually able to use it in Mythiarch Mega Colony, if someone cracks the code for Dust in literally any other clan, I could see a potential where this actually comes up again, so in other decks as well. So who knows? Just because that interaction where it's like, okay, Gize is a thing. How do we actually take advantage of this? You know, so I'm kind of curious to see if anyone will crack the code on it, because I have a few ideas in my head for Dust, but regardless, it's a good card. It is an amazing card. It is easily the best card on this tier list. Up next, we got Ultima, and I'm going to say it is definitely viable for the few clans that is actually able to take advantage of this, right? And the main reason and the major stipulation with this card is because if you run Ultima, you cannot run the over trigger. And usually, in a lot of cases, that actually matters quite a bit, especially considering the fact that in a lot of scenarios, Gold Paladin is probably the only one that actually uses this card, right? Maybe Shadow Paladin if they feel being really funny in this scenario, but usually the one clan that actually uses this is Gold Paladin, regardless of which variation of it, right? Whether it be Gurgit with like Percival, or again, Liberators with Percival, right? And this is just in large part due to the fact that when you're able to combine the high amount of attacks with the potential stand trigger and crit pressure that Ultima will inevitably bring, it means you actually also have an out toward Mega Colony in particular, and specifically with Greydora, because what ends up happening under Greydora is when you go, you ride, you do whatever other additional effects, you ditch for Ultimate Stride, you go into Ultima. Then Ultima looks for 4 cards, you shuffle the deck, and then you stack your deck, the 4 cards on top. Meaning if for some odd reason your opponent you don't kill your opponent, not only are you able to restand your entire board still while under Greydora, but you also have the ability to gain crit pressure, and if you stack your deck properly, you could potentially heal even once after the Ultima turn, assuming they, somehow don't die from it, right? And I think that is a big difference maker, and that's kind of the reason why I don't consider Ultima a side grade, because of the one clan that actually wants to use it, it could take full advantage of. And I can see potential uses for this card in the future once the over trigger gets banned. So, assuming it ever gets banned in Premium, so that's kind of the reason why I think Ultima is pretty good. Now now for the other side of the coin. Agnos is bad. Don't run Agnos. You have a bajillion different other cards that do Agnos' job but better. Specific examples I could think of off the top of my head: stuff like Spearex and Gold Paladin, Drag Principal Morfessa and Shadow Paladin. Hell, there's probably a dozen different other strides with the other 4, Keter Sanctuary clans. that kind of just come up and sit there and go, do I really need Agnos? No? Okay, moving along. So that's kind of the main thing, right? Agnos is just overall not a good card. There's never really a situation where Agnos actually helps you in the long term, and because of that, I'm going to say just throw it away. Just throw it in with the bulk bin. Like, you're never going to go into this unless the situation, for some odd reason, calls for it. And even then, just don't do it. You have a bajillion better strides that can do its job better. Up next, Formido. Formido is a nice side grade, and I'm going to tell you why. Because there are some situations in specific Dark States decks that straight up do not have enough, retire pressure in conjunction to the soul. And so what ends up happening with Formido is you're like, oh crap, I need to be able to stride for free because I get the feeling my opponent is going to rush me down and I'm not going to have much of a turn if I'm not able to stride on the follow-up. So I ditch for stride, go into Formido, soul charge a bunch, kind of sit there, end my turn, and then I at least have a nice additional follow-up. And then the clans that actually will want to take advantage of this, like Dark Irregular, and even stuff like, like Your Chronicle maybe, it is a nice side grade, I feel. Origorium. I think this card is good. I think this card is actually viable in all three Brandgate decks in particular, mostly because when you attack with this thing, you counterblast 1, you reduce your opponent's, all your opponent's front row units to 0, and that matters a lot, right? And the main reason for it is overtrigger, and just defensives in general, right? Especially in Overgrappler, where it's like, oh no, my opponent hit a defensive. Anyway, swing with Origorium activate effect to reduce your power to 0. Like, just the ability that you have that option is already pretty good, right? I think there are a lot of scenarios where you actually run Origorium over both Stark and Ultima. So that's why I'm going to put it above those two. But in general, it's actually really a nice, viable option for the Brandgate decks in particular. So definitely think it's worth it. Megaloma. I think this is really good. I think this is goated. I think this is the only Progenitor Dragon on this list that I can consider goated. And the reason for it is pretty damn simple. Every deck that wants to use it will use it, right? Mega Colony, they will tend to run this just so that way they can survive through very specific turns. Near Nectar, same case, and I don't know entirely but for Great Nature, but I would imagine they would actually run it anyway. And literally any other clan that wants to take advantage of this, or any kind of deck like a Starkea, Pile, whatever, for like the other Melonica clans that isn't, Bermuda, they may consider even going into this, just so that way they survive a turn, they have free stride on the follow-up, and then they could just blow your opponent back out. So, like, I definitely see a world where Megaloma is actually really good. It is easily the best Progenitor Dragon by a mile. You should be running this if you have the ability to. Just simply because surviving through another turn is good. The only reason why it's lower on the spectrum in comparison to Megido and Dust is simply because even with this, it is still somewhat easy to play around. Which makes me question whether or not I want to still keep it in goated, but I think I will, just simply because, unlike, Origorium or even Stark, for example, this is actually being used in a lot of top-tier decks right now, and I could definitely see a world where that kind of remains the case. So, I definitely think it's good. I think it's viable. Easily one of the better, Progenitor Dragons. Easily the best Progenitor Dragon on this list. Ballerina. I think this is a nice side grade, and I think it's better as a side grade than both Zoah and Formido. And the reason why I say it is that there's only like one clan I can see potential use for this, and that's Granblue, right? Granblue, they will run this specifically when they know their opponent has a low hand count, and they can punish with like a Beatrice, Nightstorm, Skull Dragon combo. And they have built up the hand capable of just burning through their opponent's shield like as quickly as possible, right? The only downside to this card is that there are certain defensive tools now that kind of get around this card, but even still, it is a nice include. You can run Ballerina in all three of the Melonica clans, so definitely consider it. And then lastly, we got Gilgal, whatever the guy's name is. I think this card is not bad. I'm debating if I want to put this in B or A. I'm gonna say B for now, but I'm going to put it on, like, right around here, right next to Formido. And the reason for this is that Shiranui will not run this, right? Shiranui does not run this. Eradicators will run it to an extent, just so that way they have instant countercharge and board wipe, without having to commit to, like, an Exterminate or a Stunverse kind of plan. And then you also have the other three clans that may probably tech this in because they literally don't have that many good options. Like, I imagine Tajikaze will play this. Same thing with Murakumo. Kagero, nowadays, they're just doing Dauntless Varga, so nice side grade if worse comes to worse. But in general, this is actually pretty solid. So that is the list. So obviously, the GOATs are Dust, Megido, and Megaloma. The ones that are actually viable are both of the Stargate ones and Ultima. And then the side grades are kind of just, you know, they're not terrible. But whatever you do, do not run Dust and Agnos in any of your decks going forward in the future. It is not worth it, in my opinion. Unless there's another Jamio Congo, you will never run into a situation where Dust comes up, and Agnos is just an overall terrible card. I think it's the weakest stride we have ever had in the modern era of Premium. There is no reason to run it. So, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and until next time, this is Noah, and I'll catch you guys later. Now for the channel update. So, it has been a hot minute since I've actually uploaded much of anything onto this channel, and so I kind of want to take these next few minutes to kind of go over where I've been the last month, and kind of what I intend to do going forward. So, honestly, after the presentation, I was just not in a good headspace to make content. Even though they said that there was a new ban list coming around, right around the corner to fix some of the issues that came up with the format, I was just not really having fun. And so I was just kind of sitting there like, you know what, I have other priorities I got to take care of. I got other things I can do. Let me take a break for now, and I will come back and do this in the future. And so I think in general, Vanguard is not in a good spot, right? And I've explained that before. But I think that last video I posted before this one, I think I was at my lowest point. And I think I could have handled it a little bit better, right? In general, there was just a lot going wrong. There was a lot in my mind, in my headspace, and a lot of people were just tired of the same crap that they were being served onto. You know, if the April ban list comes through and actually fixes a lot of the issues with Premium, then great. If we get more Premium events for Summerfest, that would be awesome as well. So that way, you know, the Premium players don't get completely screwed over. But in general, I'm not as enthusiastic as I used to be when it comes to making content. Kind of the reason why I took a month off. Usually around this time anyway, the ad revenue is kind of awkward as well. And just promoting the channels in general is a bit hard. Not that I get any sort of money making this content, obviously, because I don't have the view count or the sub count to even get that far, but I figured at that point, you know what, let me take a break, let the month roll over into March, and maybe I can upload then. So, yeah, that's really what's been going on. I'm going to be probably busy over the next couple months, just because of school stuff, but then afterwards I'll come back, and around like May and June, and really start pumping up the content, because I'll have a little more time to work with. But with that being said, I do want to at least apologize for one major thing, though. That is the negative side of it, right? The negativity that I've well, the entire channel's basically been known for years now. And if I'm gonna be honest with something, I'm still gonna call people out for it. I'm still gonna call Bushiroad out on things. But I'm gonna try not to be as negative as I used to be, like 3-4 years ago when I first started this channel up. But regardless, I that's just how it is. And Doggo's barking in the background, so maybe I should just cut this now. So, like I said, very sorry. You know, I'll try to be a little more positive in the future, but if not, you know, just understand it's not out of malice or any ill intent. It is legit because I want Vanguard to do better. So, yep, that's it for the channel update. More videos to come in the future, and I will catch you guys later. Bye, everyone.